Welcome to panel 1A, Religion, Conversion, and Social Justice. I'll be the moderator for this panel. My name is Matthew Baxter. I'm an associate at Harvard University's Behavior Humanities Center this year, as well as a visiting scholar at Cornell University's South Asia program. We are fortunate to be joined this morning by Dali Daftari, and she is an assistant professor of international development at the School for Global Inclusion and Social Development at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, as well as via Skype, Upendra Sonbimple, who's a research scholar at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, India, and then finally Christopher Queen, a lecturer on world religions and Buddhism, and the Dean of Students and Alumni Relations Emeritus at the Division of Continuing Education, Faculty of Arts and Sciences, Harvard University. We're going to keep it tightly to 20-minute presentations, and for the interest of time, we'll save the questions for the end. I think we'll probably just go through the order of the program, if that's okay. So we're going to begin with my own paper, which is titled Two Concepts of Conversion at Meenakshi Puram, Seeing Through Ambedkar's Buddhism, and Being Seen in EVR's Islam. Great. There's only going to be 5 slides, but the February 1981 mass conversion of roughly 180 outcast, untouchable, or Dalit families to Islam in the obscure South Indian village of Meenakshi Puram was an event far more significant than its familiar circumstances of caste abuse and labor conflict might suggest. Though often ignored, there is a consensus in the literature that this conversion gave rise to the right-wing Hindu or Hindutva backlash that helped consolidate the then newly formed BJP, whose successful stoking of fear over Meenakshi Puram as representing the vulnerability of Dalits to the financial influence of Islamic petrodollars and the specter of a new Pakistan in the South began the BJP's march to national power by the 1990s. The literature has tended to frame this Islamic conversion in 1981 at Meenakshi Puram in terms of the other important post-colonial Dalit mass conversion to a non-Hindu religion, that to Buddhism in 1956, led by Ambedkar. This framing suggests that Meenakshi Puram's event, like Ambedkar's thought, illustrates an alternative nationalism, where religious conversion was a mode of democratic fulfillment, embracing modernity's promise of equal citizenship in contrast to the hierarchical and exclusionary ideology underpinning mainstream nationalism dominated by caste Hindus. For example, Gauri Viswanathan claims that Meenakshi Puram represented not the separatist and anti-national specter feared by Hindutva elements, but rather alternative conceptions of nation and community along the lines of Ambedkar's Buddhist conversion. Gayan Pandey claims Meenakshi Puram's conversion illustrated a fragment of history excluded from mainstream nationalism, but cites Ambedkar's investments in liberty, equality, and fraternity as what actually makes the time of Dalit conversion the time of Indian democracy, which is a great phrase. While another scholar has simply suggested that Meenakshi Puram's converts should be understood as little Ambedkars. Despite its intuitive persuasiveness, there are 2 reasons to resist this collapse of Meenakshi Puram's event into Ambedkar's thought. The first reason is empirical. Simply put, there is not much evidence of Ambedkar's mention in and around Meenakshi Puram in 1981. Available reports instead document Dalits explicitly rejecting Buddhism as old-fashioned, easily co-opted by Hindu elements, and politically ineffective. In contrast, references to the local non-Brahmin leader E.V. Ramasamy Nayakar, commonly referred to as Periyar or by his initials EVR, saturate a wide swath of investigations of the Meenakshi Puram conversion across the political spectrum. As one journalist writes, after interviewing a man involved in one of the many copycat conversions following Meenakshi Puram, his own conversion stemmed from his long association with Muslims. Even when he was an atheist and a Dravidic Kharagam activist, Islam had some fascination, Mr. E.V. Ramasamy Nayakar had himself suggested once that all non-Brahmin communities should embrace Islam in order to escape from Brahmin oppression. Again and again, this statement of EVR was mentioned by many Harijans as a justification of their conversion. The second reason, which is the focus of my brief talk today, to resist the collapse of Meenakshi Puram with Ambedkar's thought, is theoretical. Though Ambedkar and EVR both believe that religious mass conversion is a project of democratic fulfillment and are often joined in articulations of caste politics, as in this political poster here, behind Thirumal Varman, I argue that they have radically different understandings of just how the time of Dalit conversion is the time of Indian democracy. Why is this circulating through? It's kind of automatically going here.
Can you turn off the house lights so
Yes.
we can see the slides?
Simply put, Meenakshi Puram raises two concepts of conversion. Ambedkar is invested in mass conversion to Buddhism as a change in mind, the psychic, where the embrace of different principles and an alteration of how one sees the world is what enables the fulfillment of democratic promise. Ambedkar's account is markedly interior, not only with respect to his emphasis on Buddhism's mental revolution in contrast with Marxist bloody revolution, mind over body, but also with his emphasis on nativity and liberal nationalism, with an affinity for an ancient past, rather than foreignness and internationalism as the place of democratic fulfillment. In contrast, I will argue that EVR is invested in mass conversion to Islam as a change of body, the somatic, where the embrace of different practices and an alteration of how one is seen in the world is what enables the fulfillment of democratic promise. EVR's account is markedly exterior, not only with respect to his emphasis on physical appearance, but also with his fusion between Islam and Marxism, where embodied practices are prioritized over mental principles, and subsequently foreignness, the international, and a dramatic future are privileged over nativity and a national past. So let's examine each concept in turn. Ambedkar's Buddhism claims that conversion fulfills democracy's promise through interiorities, making mind and nation democracy's domains. Ambedkar articulates this understanding of conversion across three theses, echoing Indian nationalist investments. First, religion, as the rules imposed for the maintenance of society, precedes politics, a thesis which cannot be controverted, since political revolutions have always been preceded by social and religious revolutions. The untouchable experience of dysfunctional politics therefore requires an unmasked conversion to ensure a meaningful democratic self-government involving the people. Conversion is necessary to the untouchables as self-government is necessary to India. Second, mind is prioritized over body, where the right sort of religious conversion involves mental change, adopting a new doctrinal basis for social maintenance in consonance with liberty, equality, and fraternity, in short, with democracy. Given Ambedkar's preoccupation with mental slavery, where caste discrimination is deeply rooted in our minds, and an insistence that people are merely the results of beliefs inculcated by the Shastras, religious conversion is the only antidote because it creates an awakened consciousness, providing freedom of mind, the real freedom, and rational mastery against superstitious subordination. For a man who is his own master, him alone I consider a free man. Ambedkar subsequently discusses his 1956 mass conversion to Buddhism in markedly cognitive terms, involving oaths and beliefs which should be accepted with comprehension as a conscious act, where books are appropriate vehicles to remove doubts and suspicions and achieve full knowledge, while claiming my conversion is not for any material gain, but based on nothing but spirituality. Third, democracy's location is native, not foreign. Despite Ambedkar's 1930s claims about conversion's virtue being its ability to draw egalitarian strength from the outside, by the 1950s, Ambedkar insisted on conversion's ability to draw egalitarian strength from the indigenous past of Buddhism, which survived for 2,000 years in India and thus is not new, nor borrowed from anywhere. This path is purely Indian and not alien. Locating democratic fulfillment in particular social rules, cognitive freedom, and indigenous regions ultimately pits Buddhism against Marxism. Both focus on what man wants for life on earth, but Buddhism's this-worldly reforms entail bloodless mental revolution and a change of mind, rather than Marxism's physical bloody revolution and bodily violence. Ambedkar's dismissal of Marxism in the 1950s as crudely material, about full meals and sound sleep, extends from his dismissal of socialism in the 1930s as insufficiently attentive to the mental prejudices of India, marked by caste's unique division of labor accompanied by gradation of laborers. Thus, Ambedkar's democratic remedy for such mental slavery is nonviolent Buddhist mass conversion. If Ambedkar's concept of conversion centers on the psychic, where Buddhist conversion was a change in principle defined by a national, cultural, cognitive, and even textual interiority, whereby one could see the world differently, EVR's concept of conversion centers on the somatic, where Islamic conversion was a change in practices defined by an international, material, physical, and non-textual exteriority, whereby one could be seen differently in the world. This contrast with Ambedkar is evident in the speeches EVR delivered on Islam from 1929 to 1931. In fact, reactions to Meenakshi Puram draw us to this very period. A 1981 booklet published by a Muslim press addressing Meenakshi Puram partially republished a speech EVR delivered in October 1929, the year in which EVR began speaking at Mawlid, the celebration of the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. This October 1929 speech, when examined in its original entirety, in conjunction with his Mawlid speeches from 1929 to 1931, introduced elements central to EVR's concept of conversion: a tension between seeing and being seen, the dismissal of any understanding of religion or Islam as mental or spiritual, the positioning of Islam within a world historical frame of progressive social reforms ultimately fulfilled by Marxism, the embrace of foreignness while refusing nativity, and an understanding of politics unavoidably saturated by force, if not violence. In his October 1929 speech, Islamic conversions appealed to EVR as a way of achieving democracy's promise in two modes. First, as a way of being seen differently, rather than simply seeing differently, prioritizing bodily appearance over mental principles. Second, as global mass mobilization with a labor-inflected challenge to regionalized governmental administrations of authority and power. The speech's first segment makes the traditional radical materialist move in Indian epistemology, an emphasis on pratyaksha, or direct observation, as the sole way of knowing, to the exclusion of other cognitive means or pramana such as inference or testimony. Though EVR discusses pratyaksha as a way of seeing that can identify obstacles to the achievement of self-respect, which is the non-Brahmin term of democratic fulfillment, the positive achievement of self-respect is not about seeing differently, but about being seen differently. Some have written to me that the Mohammedan religion creates a rough appearance, a murta subhavam. If that is true, I think it indeed is a good idea to recommend the Mohammedan religion. Moreover, it is Islamic conversion of a particular sort that provides the appearance necessary to achieve self-respect. There is no other way to secure equality and unity except for untouchables to become Mohammedans en masse. Though the 1981 republication of this 1929 speech ends with this mention of mass movement, EVR mentions the masses once again in the original speech's concluding section. EVR here describes a destitute India as a nation that boards a ship for the sake of labor to a foreign country, with crumpled laborers lying starved in mass without work, without employment. This doubled appearance of the mass invites a link between untouchable Muslim converts and global labor struggles, with the accompanying suggestion that the achievement of the masses' self-respect may require international rather than national horizons. Accordingly, EVR segues in the speech's concluding section from global laboring masses to the rejection of governments with nation-state horizons, describing a world history where two agents everywhere collude in forming governments as a method to administer authority. High caste priests marked by atrocity and cunning, and brutal kings marked by thievery and arrogance. Through his two uses of the Mass, I suggest, EVR thereby invites reflection on the relationship between Islamic conversion and international labor, between eradicating particular Indian untouchability and interrogating the ability of regionalized governmental administrations of power to address issues of survival or justice. Just a few months earlier, in August 1929, EVR began speaking at Mawlid. EVR's Mawlid speeches from 1929 to 1931 emphasized physical externality and different practices involving appearance rather than mental internality and different principles that remedy prejudice, a focus on progressive historical reform where the recent overcomes the ancient, and an understanding of religious propagation that cannot be disassociated from violence. Though EVR's Mawlid speeches are peppered with references to terms like liberty, equality, and fraternity, unlike the well-read Ambedkar, the less formally educated EVR is not at all interested in locating these terms in books, oaths, and doctrines. EVR repeatedly claims never to say a single thing about what was written in each religion's foundational text, because I am not one who has read all those and not worthy to do that, dismissing religious books as without a single benefit, and the research of textual foundations as for a student exam. EVR's basis for religious evaluation is, instead and again, the radical epistemology of direct perception. As EVR claims, because one may make a philosophical meaning however one may want through textual interpretation, I will be discussing the matters which we see in Pratyaksha, assessing Hinduism and Islam through the results experienced by their members. Real philosophy is articulated through action and not the pages of a book, demanding a certain synesthesia, where philosophy can be heard only through the seeing of direct perception. The Islam religion says in Pratyaksha, help the lame, the crippled, the hunchbacked, and the blind. The principle of the Hindus says in Pratyaksha, help the lazy bones who rejoice eating the hard work of those of the town. As we saw in October 1929, such Pratyaksha is not sufficient for achieving self-respect, but requires a more embodied, effective disposition. It is not simply how one sees, but how one is seen that is important. On the one hand, EVR encourages the use of clear eyes and untinted corrective lenses to cut through religion as mere guise or vation. Such deceptive guise in the name of religion is a stumbling block, not only for Hindu-Muslim unity in India, but for the world historical unity of the true human Dharma. On the other hand, Islam's appeal is precisely its guise. EVR's speeches insist on traits such as confidence, valor, and daring in order to see clearly, yet such traits are supplemental to Pratyaksha. They are found in Islam as a religion which gives manliness and valor. How? Muslims are more daring than others. If others see them, the others are afraid, but Muslims are not afraid of anyone. EVR does not embrace Islam as a way of seeing through mere appearances, but being seen in a particular appearance, thereby focusing much more on the physical guise, not doctrine, of Islam as transformative. As EVR claims of Islamic conversion later in 1943, putting on the Turkish skull cap and tying the red lungi creates valor, dignity, and daring of life for society, whose appearance generates hesitation from the government to the Brahmin, according to a fire growing a bit in the mind. These differences of the concepts of conversion between EVR, focused on embodied external changes, and Ambedkar, focused on cognitive internal changes, segue into three further differences dealing with conversion's relationship with time, place, and force. First, with respect to time, whereas Ambedkar favored Buddhism as ancient, EVR favors Islam as recent. As EVR claims, the Prophet Muhammad was the highest of the great ones among religious leaders, and generally should be followed by all people, because his religion was later and is more recent than all other religions. Therefore, it removed all errors and faults among other religions, and is thus that which has an appropriate amount of reform. EVR invokes Darwinian evolution to not only further explain why Islam's world historical fulfillment of progressive social reform makes it suitable for the world itself, but also why Muhammad is the historical overcoming of previous figures like Christ and the Buddha. Furthermore, the next step in world historical fulfillment is the very thing which Ambedkar contrasts with Buddhism, Marxism. Though EVR's progressive history demands that the world must consent to the Islam principle, since the world is a slave to reform and reason, Marxism is the next step. If one wants to classify a principle beyond the Islamic religious principles, it must today be the Russian religion. Besides that, Islam has given to the people freely as much liberty, fraternity, and heroism as possible. Second, with respect to place, rather than the national and native, which grounded Ambedkar's appeal to the Buddha, EVR favors the international and foreign. For EVR, Islam, like Marxism, refuses particularities of nation, religion, caste, color, and class, while suggesting that the internationalism animating both Islam and Marxism does not praise the difference between their own society and a foreign society, but perhaps even invites one to imagine oneself as foreign. Third, with respect to forests, whereas Ambedkar's Buddhist conversion refused violence to achieve social justice, EVR claims instead that all religions are violently propagated, without a distinction between coerced religion and authentic religion. The difference between Hinduism and Islam cannot be force's presence, but force's effect. EVR repeatedly discusses how Hindu force results in divisiveness and hierarchy, in contrast to the unity, valor, and daring associated not with Islamic religious principles, but Muslim rough appearance. So in conclusion, what we see in EVR's speeches from 1929 to 1931, a period directly referenced at Meenakshi Puram, is a point-by-point opposition to Ambedkar's understanding of how Dalit conversion is the time of Indian democracy. It is not text but actions, not ideas but bodies, not force's absence but force's presence, not native but foreign, not past but future, not Marxism's opposition but embrace. In short, not an internal psychic change of worldviews, but an external somatic change in how one is viewed in the world that marks Islamic mass conversion's appeal to EVR. I have another paragraph which I'd love to share with you later on if you guys are interested, but I'll wrap up right here. Thank you very much. So next up we have Dali Daftari, who will be presenting a paper titled Imagining Religion and Caste-Based Equality in Gujarat, Subaltern Life Worlds and Conceptions of Justice.
How do I set mine up? Hello everyone, thank you for being here and thank you Matthew for moderating the session. So my title is Imagining an Equal Order in Gujarat, Subaltern Life Worlds and Conceptions of Justice, and I'm reminded of Roja Singh's remarks yesterday about the giving the nomenclature subaltern to Dalits, right? So you can see that this is from a non-Dalit perspective. The background of my talk, I'm going to present to you a narrative, a story from one of my Koli key informants in the course of my dissertation fieldwork in Gujarat in 2007. And Kolis are a cultivator caste classified among the other backward classes in the Indian constitution. This is from a larger study focused on the impact of market-driven development strategies that are so much in vogue around the world today. Their impact on human well-being in communities dependent on natural resources, which are inhabited by marginalized social groups around the world, largely indigenous people, tribes, groups which are known as Adivasis in India, and subordinate social classes, which in India include cultivator castes and also Dalits. So, many of you are familiar with the context of Gujarat in Western India. I was born in Gujarat and I am Gujarati. I grew up in Delhi. So I like to sort of use that identity to challenge, Gujarati hegemonic discourses of Hindu nationalism. So Gujarat is publicly depicted as a model of the success of India's market reforms. It's also the laboratory of Hindutva. It has charted a particularly pro-market path under the Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party since 1995. It's been the site of India's worst episode of violence against Muslims in 2002, which was during the rule of Narendra Modi, who was then Chief Minister of Gujarat and is now India's Prime Minister. India's globally high-profile Prime Minister won the national election partly on the branding of the Gujarat model of development, based on the celebration of entrepreneurial identities and the idea of the market as being a vehicle for human well-being. And this has created a pretty dystopian state. So growing market expansion in Gujarat is accompanied by social dislocation. Gujarat was ranked 8th among Indian states in human development in 1983. Its position fell to 12th spot in 2004, rising only to 11th about 12 years after that in 2016. And you see the Time magazine's covers here. The first says Modi means business. He literally stands for the business class. And the second one refers to why Modi matters. So I've been carrying out fieldwork in Dahod district in eastern Gujarat. Dahod lies at Gujarat's borders in a set of districts in a northeastern to southeastern arc, which are semi-arid districts dominated by Adivasis. These are regions from which natural resources, water and cheap labor move to Gujarat's industrial and urban centers located at the heart of the state. Semi-arid districts have erodible lands, low rainfall and periodic drought. Most households are subsistence producers and people combine cultivation with livestock ownership. And I'm talking about livestock ownership in the context of the Hindu rights' recent cow protection campaigns. So people own goats, cows, buffaloes, oxen and bull. Livestock are very important for economic security because they can be sold in case of a drought or scarcity without having to sell or mortgage land. 74% of Dahod's population is Adivasi, and other groups include Kolis, which dominate Limkheda block in Dahod, and Dalits. Dalits are scattered across villages. They are numerically quite marginalized, and they lack access to public goods, drinking water sources, including hand pumps. Untouchability is widely practiced. Dahod also adjoins Panchmahal district. So you see the small district right next to Dahod, that's Panchmahal. Dahod was in fact carved out of Panchmahal in 1997 as district populations grow, new districts are carved out of old ones. And Panchmahal is home to Godhra, which was the epicenter of the 2002 pogrom against Muslims. So Dahod and Panchmahal were both quite deeply affected by the violence. So I'm going to talk about the story of my Koli peasant informant in the context. This interview was done in 2007, and I'm going to talk about it in the context of growing mobilization by the Hindu extremist Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh in rural Gujarat since the 1990s. And Gujarat is also a laboratory because because the RSS's expansion into rural areas has really served as a model for the Hindu rights penetration into rural parts of India where interreligious violence has otherwise been absent. So in Dahod, the RSS's mobilization has consisted of the othering of Muslims to consolidate Koli, Adivasi and Dalits into a pan-Hindu fold. They've done this through civic, political and religious organizations, schools, hostels, to which Adivasis and other groups gain admission and study, village, block and district level units of the BJP, which sort of facilitate the membership of elected local leaders, panchayat leaders called sarpanches, ward members, local contractors and so on, who have a voice in the party's activities in the district and its political and economic mobilization. In Dahod, this has been accompanied by the decline of Gandhian social service organizations like the Bhil Seva Mandal, which was set up by Thakkar Baba, the Gandhian activist in the 1920s. Tariq Thachil documents similar patterns in Madhya Pradesh, in rural Madhya Pradesh, where the RSS's organizations, through their model of seva or service, have mobilized the support of subordinate classes. So we find that at least since the 2000s, which is when I first went there for fieldwork for my master's thesis, Adivasis identify themselves as Hindu Adivasi rather than Adivasi. Which is really interesting from a group that's been ostracized by Hindu society and even considered out of the fold of caste ordering. Adivasis now identify themselves as Hindu Adivasi. Kolis have been referring to Muslims as Pakistanis, and there's been explicit justification of the 2002 riot. This is particularly so among younger Koli men rather than older men. So there are generational differences. Older men and women often identify with the Congress party, and with younger folks, the BJP has gained a lot of popularity. So I conducted fieldwork over 10 months as part of my long-term fieldwork in this community, which I'm going to call Mahipura here. It's inhabited by Kolis and Adivasis. Kolis are really significant in Gujarat's electoral politics because they are one of its largest voting blocs. And BJP's ascendance in Gujarat is associated with the breakdown of the Congress's Kham alliance, which was based on economic solidarity among Khatris, which include Kolis and Rajputs, Harijans or Dalits, Adivasis and Muslims. So, in the context of Muslims being called Pakistanis in Dahod, I asked my informant Ramabhai about whether Muslims were Indian at all. So, are Muslims Indian? And he said, of course they must be. This is one populace. Abadi ek praja chai. The government is ours, but the people are God's. Sarkar apdi chai. The government is ours. Pan praja bhagwan ni chai. The people belong to God. So he's invoking a higher power or a higher rule, asserting the inviolability of a people, inalienable natural rights, a demographic equality of a population, and law of a higher force. So I would push him more on some of these ideas, and I'd asked him about social relations among different groups in Dahod. And he narrated this story about the origin of the word. And he said there was a Bhangro, which is a reference to a sanitation caste, Dalit, and there was a Koli. The Bhangro fished in the river and ate fish. He ate so many that the fish got angry and cursed him. One day it will rain as high as the toddy tree, Tarputi, and you will be drowned. God heard the fish and repeated the fish's curse to the Bhangi, he uses the word Bhangi here, and the Koli. The men transformed into a boy and a girl, brother and sister. They made a makeshift boat out of wood. They weren't carpenters, so they didn't really know how to, and they were the last people on earth. God was enraged with them and made them get out of the boat, move to dry ground, and stand side by side, one against each tree. He asked the boy, "Who's this?" He said, "This is my sister." He asked the girl, "Who's this?" "This is my brother." He asked them 4 times. They gave the same answer each time. The 5th time, he asked the girl, "Who is this?" She said, "I don't know him." The boy said, "I don't know her." So now they could mate. And all the jatis, castes were born. Koli, Harijan, Banya, Musalman, Brahmin. There are 18,000 crore jatis, but it's the same blood, the same milk. Manyas are an upper caste trader community. This is very interesting also because in the context of Hindu nationalism's attempt to impose vegetarian on Indian society, he's telling me that the Bhangro ate fish. So the Kolis' dietary practices sort of erased from that narrative, but they're both punished. So it suggests that they both ate fish. Also, Kolis, the Chauhan community with which I did field work, have historically been carpenters. So he's talking about how they built this makeshift boat out of wood, but they weren't really carpenters. So going back to the stories, a wondrous world is invoked, which has an ecological crisis, where we see the agency of nature and its ability to punish. We see the permeability of boundaries between humans and animals. We have fish that talk and that curse people. And categories, human categories are transmuted from marked identities of caste, Koli and Bhangro, and masculinity to unmarked human categories of boy and girl. Relations are transmuted from the social distance of jati, of caste, to intimate relations of kinship and blood. These two people become siblings. There's a wiping out, there's a flood, a wiping out of an unjust space-time which reaches crisis and dissolves, from which a new world is born. In this new world, Kolis, Vanyas, Dalits, Brahmins, and Muslims are equal, the same blood, the same milk. And in what's quite wonderful, the transgression of incest through which humanity is produced literally indexes a brotherhood of progenitors or a brotherhood of people. So really, we siblings, we connected by blood. In what's very interesting, Anand Pandyan, in his ethnography of cultivator castes in Tamil Nadu, in semi-arid districts in Tamil Nadu, which are ecologically and demographically quite similar to eastern Gujarat, the two places are poles apart, separated by many states, Tamil Nadu at the southern tip of India and Gujarat in western India. He talks about a similar story told by cultivator castes among his informants. They talk about the whole world being swept away by a flood, save for a brother and sister who float in a pair of squashes and are taught by Shiva and Parvati to desire each other as husband and wife. And it suggests to us and opens up possibilities of strong currents of egalitarian narratives among subaltern groups that counter caste Hindu hierarchy and hegemony. They're evocative of justice, a universal rule, primordial truth, and an immanent understanding of democracy. And both these narratives draw upon divinity themselves to counter caste hegemony. Now these are imaginary narratives and they're sort of imaginative pieces, but they are connected to everyday life and people's lived experience. These narratives challenge common sense ideas of a social order in Gujarat that's based on hierarchy and difference, and they're rooted in people's everyday practices. For example, I found that when I was doing household surveys with families in my fieldwork community, I would ask my informants to identify their jati, right? I was interested in caste comparisons of access to economic resources, social services, government officials, and so on. And Adivasi respondents uniformly identified themselves as Adivasis. But there was genuine confusion and uncertainty among many of my Koli respondents about whether to identify themselves as Koli or Adivasi. And people would often ask each other, well, so are we Koli, are we Adivasi, what should we put in there? And that suggests that the social boundaries between these groups have not been very sharp until the recent past. In the context of the cow protection campaigns of the Hindu right, particularly the skinning of Dalit youth in Una, Gujarat earlier this year, I also want to talk about the shared meanings around cattle among Kolis, Dalits, Adivasis, and Muslims. Kolis, Dalits, Adivasis, and Muslims see cattle as economic wealth. Koli cultivators, Adivasis, see them as living wealth. They're a source of subsistence for all these groups. They're a means of production. And they have downstream uses, productive uses. And these narratives also stem from sort of lived, shared material realities. And this suggests limits to the cow protection campaigns of the Hindu right, as we saw in Una. Now, at the end of my fieldwork in 2007, the BJP had state-level elections. The BJP won the state election by the smallest majority in Dahod, and this pattern is repeated across tribal districts. The Modi government initiated a Samras or consensus campaign in 2006 for the Panchayat elections, and the attempt was to have Sarpanchis, Panchayat leaders, selected through consensus decision making in communities without holding elections, so that crevices of dissent were not opened up at the community level. And people challenged this narrative by asking, well, if he wants to, his rationale was to save money by not having it wasted on elections. And they said, well, why doesn't he have a consensus election for his own position, for the chief minister's position, or for the MPs, or the MLAs, and so on? Why do it for Panchayat leaders? And, the Samras campaign met the highest opposition in Dahod, which had the lowest number of consensual candidates elected. So there's underlying narratives, stories and imaginary worlds are connected to lived reality. And I just found this really powerful and I wanted to share this with this audience. Thank you.
So thanks so much, Dolly, for that really interesting interesting insight into sort of political imaginaries in Gujarat. I've been informed that we can extend our panel to 12:30, so the other two speakers will have plenty of time to talk. So with that, we are joined via Skype I don't know how this is going to work.
I'll be controlling
You'll be
it. So,
okay,
yeah.
good.
So.
A very good morning from India. My name is Upendra Sonkapure. I am a research scholar from Tata Institute of Law, Mumbai. And my paper title is OBC's Buddhist Conversion Movement in Maharashtra Towards Annihilation of Caste. Can you, my voice is clear here?
Yes.
Okay. The paper is, as you read the title, it's clearly saying that what it is all about. It is about the Buddhist conversion movement which has happened last year, 2016, where on 6 October 2016, the 5,000 OBCs has been converted into Buddhism, and then on 25th December, around 40,000 OBC has been converted into Buddhism. Please, the first introduction, please. Can you see the paper? Yeah, introduction paper. Can you?
Can you reduce the background music, please?
Can you there's a lot of background offense? Can you decrease the background? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you're fine.
One
Okay,
second.
go ahead.
So this paper is basically talking about what are the reason of these OBCs converting into Buddhism and why they choose Buddhism for the conversion of this religion, and how the Satyashodak OBC Parishad, which is a Maharashtra-based organization working for the OBC's empowerment, and which is also emerged as a cultural movement in Maharashtra last 6 years. So, next slide. Yeah. In next slide,
Too much background noise.
the methodology part, which is I want to say that the paper is basically take the narratives from the biography written by the member activists of this movement. One is the leader and the founder of the Satyashodak Parishad is Hanuman Upre, and the others, those who the member of Satyashodak OBC Parishad, and these people already written this in a book which is edited by which is written by Sadhvi, and the writer is also the part of this movement, and he published this writing and biography of the activist in his book called Padga. The next slide. This is basically the OBC conversion. So we have to know about what is who are the OBC, what are the history behind of calling them OBC. So the OBC is a constitutional category which is emerged from the affirmative action bring by the Indian Constitution. The OBCs are basically the other backward caste and other backward classes. Those are the caste basically. The number of the caste, those who known as the Shudra caste. So OBC are the Shudra caste in a Brahmin social structure, where Shudra is come under the bottom of the caste system, and they are the caste hierarchy in a bottom. So they have been excluded from this giving basic human right, what we call as education, employment, or opportunity for everything, which is come under as human right that has been not given to this community since long time, and this community, those who call Shudra, they are basically below these three castes, like Brahmin, Kshatriya and Vaishya, and above the ex-untouchable caste. And as the caste system, we know that which is divided by these the birth and occupation, and as Domo talked about the caste system in India, he characterized the caste in purity and pollution form. Where each caste, the above caste has been keep distance because of those who consider themselves as purer than the other communities. And next step. As Shudra caste, those who known as OBC caste today, actually in constitution in free India, there is the provision made for the depressed classes. The depressed classes, which is you can say the SCs, STs, and OBC. ST, the SCs are the Dalit, the STs are the Adivasi community, and the OBC are the Shudra caste, the lower Shudra caste. So in Indian Constitution, Article 16, which is a commander from fundamental right, empowers state to bring the policy and policy to represent them in government sectors. So if we go back to history, we also made a constitution. Like in the Drafting Committee, Dr. Ambedkar was the head of the Drafting Committee, and he was suggested the Article 344 for the OBC community, and through this article, Article 340. Imposed state to set up the commission for these socially and educationally backward classes, and that was also denied by the then government, and it was implemented in 1991 by the VP Singh government, and there the OBC community get 27% reservation in education and employment. And still, if you find there is no census has been done for the OBC community, and whatever popular India is today, that is from the 1931 census. Next slide. Then we come to the Maharashtra context. If you find the OBC, they are roughly around 52% population. That is also taken from the 1931 census, and it is also used in Backward Commission website if you find it. And in Maharashtra, there are 261 castes, which are Kunbi, Kumbar, Kamar, Teli, Dhobi, Banjari, and Pitesta. Next. And when we talk about the movement in Maharashtra was the place where the social reform movement had long history, and in context of the OBC, if you see the Satyashodak movement, which is started by Mahatma Phule in 1873, and then after that the Dravidian movement in South India, where the self-district movement, self-district movement of Periyar, and the Ijva movement, which is SNDP we call the Ijva movement, which is done by Narayan Guru. That you can find in two different eras. One is colonial era where you find all these movements, Satyashoda, Dravidian movement, and then post-colonial movement you will only get the Mandal agitation. Mandal agitation where after 60 years of the independence also, the OBC government, the OBC haven't get any they haven't been take any benefit of the affirmative action, which is there in constitution, and the post this Mandal agitation is government to bring a backward commission and give the reservation for this OBC. And there is, if you see, there are like no movement for the OBC as such, but there is a movement like the peasantry movement where the OBC are there, but they are not. This movement are not specific with the caste, but which is very much like homogeneous community, like peasant or tailor and like this. Next, this slide. The emergence of the Satyashoda OBC Parishad, the Parishad was founded by the Hanuman Upre in 2005. The aim of this Parishad, this was, I think, the post Mandal present moment. This movement has been noticed and it is being identified as a movement in Maharashtra. It is very phenomenal. People still this Parishad has been working for to mobilize community, basically community for the conversion in Buddhism. So from 2005 to 2016, this Parishad started movement, or they organized campaign called Chala Buddhacha Vatev. It is in Marathi meaning let go to Buddha. Their campaign is talk about let embrace Buddhism. Next slide. As we see the Indian history, the conversion movement has long history. Like if you see the Bhakti movement, where the different saints and been able to criticize the Brahmin religion, and then the Mughals and the British missionaries who also brought a lot of conversion in Islam and Christianity in India. Then why the conversion is basically what is conversion? If you define the conversion, here is defined conversion as he said in some description. Conversion involves a dramatic turnabout, either accepting a belief system and behavior strongly at odds with one previous cognitive structure and action, or returning to the state of belief and commitment against which one has been strongly in a rebellion. In another description, conversion involves a qualitative change in experience in the level of commitment, regardless of the previous mindset. The Buddhist conversion or OBC conversion into Buddhism has the history of backwardness and the violence from the Hindu religion, where they find Hindu religion, it never accepts them as a community. It is not considered as a Hindu community at all, because the same Hindu upper caste discriminated them and kept them away from all the basic human rights. The next slide. Hello. Yeah. The Hanuman Upre is. It is very important to understand the leadership phenomena in Maharashtra and basically the OBC context. Hanuman Upre is a leader who emerged from the Ambedkarite politics, and he later started his own organization, which is also a social and cultural organization for the OBC community, and he was in Republican Party of India, which is run by the Prakash Ambedkar. He spent more than 20 years in RPI, and then in 2005 he left, and in the same year he started the Satyashoda OBC Parishad. So he was announced that in 2011 he announced that he will convert around with 6 lakh OBC into Buddhism. But he couldn't do that because he passed away in 2015 by heart attack in Pune. And later his son and other the activist member in organization bring this conversion movement in 2016 to tribute his leader and the founder member of this organization. And when 40,000 OBC converted into Buddhism. Next slide. Hanuman Upre and his thought on religion. Like, it is very important to understand the Hanuman Upre's because the leadership which is influencing the community. And now, if you see the 40,000 OBC has been converted, that means it is a very different and very unique phenomenon which never been never been found in Maharashtra or Indian country. They're basically the OBCs, those who converted in Buddhism. So Hanuman Upre, he was influencing the community. He done a lot of field work in the villages, and he tried to mobilize many people. And he also established different center of Parishad, of Satyashuddha OBC Parishad in the cities and the district of the Maharashtra. So the Hanuman Upre idea of religion is influencing the OBC community, and they are converting in Buddhism. And that is why it is very important to understand this idea of religion. So from his childhood, he has been experiencing the fraud in Hinduism, superstition and deviation, blind faith and caste discrimination. Caste discrimination, which is also which is major problem he described in his speech. And when he was in Pune, it was a conference in Pune in 2014. In his speech he says that there is a violence on the OBC community on 26 January and 15 August, which are the Republic Day and the Independence Day of the India. This day, the OBC elected member of Gram Panchayat, the village local elected body, the OBC member, they are not allowed to flag they never allowed to flag the Indian flag. And there are.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. You have one more minute. Can you go to the conclusion slide and conclude the presentation?
Okay, sorry.
Okay, can I go to the conclusion to the last slide now?
Yes.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I'm in the conclusion slide.
So the whole conclusion or the idea of paper is why they converting because this OBC has been experiencing the humiliation and dehumanization in Hindu religion, and same the superstition and the backwardness is reason for them. The reason for them is Hindu religion, and that is why the Buddhism they choose, because the Buddhism given them the scientific understanding about the social and personal life, and also it is also liberate them from this Hindu religious or political superstition things. And also this conversion, if you see why it is annihilation for caste. So if you find the different community has been converting in Buddhism, and Buddhism which is considered also the complete change in the social structure of Indian society, which is based on caste. And Ambedkar also when he after the last time he converted in Buddhism, that was a message which is where he given the idea of the Prabuddha Bharata, where whole community become the Buddhist, and there will be the egalitarian society will emerge. If all the Indian population converted to Buddhism, there will be no caste. And the Buddhist ideas basically depend upon this equality, fraternity, and liberty idea. And that is why the Prabuddha Bharata, the Indian Buddhist India, which is a dream by the Ambedkar, is brought by this OBC community. And the Buddhist identity has been evolved in different passage of time, because if you see the Dalit Bahujan movement in Maharashtra, from the long time, like the Dalit movement, and then the different identity has been emerged, like Harijan, Dalit, Mool Nivasi, Bahujan, and now is Buddhist identity. So this identity is not just identity, but it is also the consciousness of the people, and this consciousness is about change, the complete change of inner social structure, because the caste is a strong fabric where there is no energy will travel. And this movement, like Dalit Panther movement or any movement, or Satyashodak movement from Mahatma Phule to till now, this has been weakening the structure, but it is not completely destroy the structure. And the Buddhism is a stand for the whole idea of anti-Brahminic. So that is why this conversion is given the like you can say the idea about if the OBC of this country has been converted, then there are the 52%. Then Dalit and OBC constitute these people will constitute the highest population of this.
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I'm extremely sorry. I have to interrupt you because we are over the time now. But thank you very much for coming on this live.
Bupendra, thank you for that talk on Buddhist conversion and for the opportunity to participate in the miracles of modern technology. We'll call up Christopher Queen, our final speaker, who will be delivering a paper entitled Ambedkar Buddhist to Meditate or Not. We'll have a full 20 minutes, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A afterwards.
Get the slideshow going.
Yes, I will.
I feel like I've been in Mumbai for the last 20 minutes. You get all the background sounds there. It sounds just like Mumbai. Now we're in Waltham, Massachusetts. Jai Bhim, everyone. Thank you for coming. So, let's see if these buttons work. Great, okay. I think this will fit in 20 minutes. I'll just try as clearly as possible. In the 60 years since the Buddhist conversions initiated by B.R. Ambedkar in 1956, followers of his Navayana or New Vehicle Buddhism are still undecided about the role of meditation and what role it should play in their lives. Critics argue that Vipassana, the meditation technique taught by S.N. Goenka, founder of a worldwide movement headquartered in Mumbai, near Mumbai, promotes political passivity and regression to a Brahmanical Hindu mindset. On the other hand, supporters of meditation, some trained in the Goenka centers, others in Ambedkar-inspired organizations such as the Triratna Buddhist Movement, or TBM, also centered in Maharashtra, reply that the practice of meditation, mindfulness, or vipassana, I'll use these interchangeably, sharpens their perceptions of reality as the Buddha taught, making them better Buddhists and more effective activists for social change. These differences came to public attention at the time of the Ambedkar birth centenary in 1991, when Professor Gopal Guru of Pune University accused members of the TBM of spiritualizing Ambedkar's message by promoting what he called transcendental meditation and by de-emphasizing political activism. The article was titled Hinduization of Ambedkar in Maharashtra and appeared in the Economic and Political Weekly in February 1991. Dhamachari Lokamitra, the British-born leader and spokesman for the TBM, responded with a detailed rebuttal, citing Ambedkar's endorsement of meditation and mental cultivation as the basis for political and social change. Today, 21 years later, the debate rages on. Pardeep Singh Atri, creator and host of a popular website, Dr. Ambedkar's Caravan, which you can find by typing drambedkarbooks.com, writes, did Buddha really say meditate? There are many Ambedkar Buddhists in India who would argue that he never said meditate, and these days the interpretations are coming from different adulterated sources and from abroad, where they don't really know the real Buddhism. Dr. Ambedkar's idea of Buddhism was scientific. What Vipassana teaches would be spiritual, which I believe these are quite different. I am not denying that there might be benefits to meditation at the personal level, but how socially and politically active are those who are doing meditation and those who are not? What have those involved in Vipassana done collectively for the community? At the same time, Rajesh Kumar Baud, an Ambedkar Buddhist activist teaching in Bodh Gaya, speaking for himself and his wife, Dr. Usha Kumari Baud, writes, "We both practice Vipassana and organize monthly meditation programs in the Burmese monastery in Bodh Gaya. I believe that meditation purifies our mind from all mental pollutions and gives us mental powers to solve our difficulties of life and makes us stronger. The more one practices Vipassana, the more powerful one becomes. People who reject Vipassana are the ones who want to get something without self-endeavor." Rajesh and Usha are from the local Dalit community and teach social studies in the public schools. Rajesh also teaches meditation at the Root Institute in Bodh Gaya, which is run by the Foundation for the Preservation of Mahayana Buddhism, an international organization. It's Rajesh and Usha on the left. In the next couple of minutes, I would like to present a sampling of my findings from interviews with advocates on both sides of this debate, as well as published studies and editorials. Ambedkar's extensive writings on Buddhism offer many points of reference in these exchanges, as do the writings of leading scholars of Ambedkar Buddhism, such as Sangharakshita, Eleanor Zelli, and Johannes Belz. I hope you will see the wide range of responses that Ambedkar Buddhists have contributed to this debate, which I will note is not so different from the debate in the West over the many applications of mindfulness-based stress reduction and its derivatives. In both cases, strong partisans for and against the meditation detached from the struggles of social justice have loudly entered the conversation. 21 years after his famous Yeola speech, in which he declared his intention to seek a faith outside Hinduism, Ambedkar publicly and dramatically embraced Buddhism on October 14, 1956. After taking the traditional refuges and precepts from the most senior Theravada monk in India, along with his wife, Maisab Ambedkar, the retired leader administered the vows to his followers, who numbered nearly 4 lakhs. Hundreds of thousands more followed in the coming weeks, followed by millions more by 1961, when the Indian census registered an explosion of more than 1,000% of those calling themselves Buddhists, perhaps the largest Buddhist conversion in history. At the same time that Ambedkar was preparing for his historic event, he was struggling to finish The Buddha and His Dhamma, his final book, which he called a Bible for the New Faith. In the section of the book titled How a Bodhisattva Becomes a Buddha, Ambedkar treats the role of meditation as follows. It took Gautama 4 weeks of meditation to obtain enlightenment. He reached final enlightenment in 4 stages. In the first stage, he called forth reason and investigation, then concentration, equanimity, mindfulness, purity. Thus, with his mind concentrated, purified, spotless, with defilements gone, supple, dexterous, firm, dispassionate, not forgetting what he was after, Gautama realized that there were 2 problems to be solved. The first was that there is suffering in the world, and the second was how to remove the suffering and make mankind happy. So in the end, after meditation for 4 weeks, darkness was dispelled, light arose, ignorance was dispelled, and knowledge arose, and he saw a new way. Like many other passages in Ambedkar's final work, this section incorporates language from the Pali texts that he pored over in his final years, as well as the interpolations he believed would help his readers to understand the teachings of Buddhism. These distinctions are spelled out very well in Oxford's critical annotated edition of the BHD, which appeared in 2011. Yet, in spite of this and other passages which faithfully report the centrality of meditation in the Eightfold Path of the Buddha, we know that Ambedkar himself did not meditate. To read a detailed account of his career, such as those of Keir and his close associates, is to see a man in constant motion, testifying in government hearings, teaching, writing, leading and addressing protest gatherings, and attempting to embody the slogan that he imported from his alma mater of the London School of Economics: educate, agitate, organize. His audience was first and foremost the tens of millions of untouchables throughout India, and secondly, the upper-class Hindus and Buddhist colonial administrators who dominated the political and economic life of India. Never in the archives of Ambedkar's multitasking life or in the thousands of photos that were taken of him in his many roles was there a record of Dr. Ambedkar in formal meditation, with body composed and centered, facial features relaxed, eyes closed or partly closed in contemplation. An insight into Ambedkar's attitude toward meditation as a viable activity for modern Buddhists was offered by his commission of 2 busts of the Buddha, which were installed in Dehu Road near Pune and in his own study in Delhi. Professor Gary Tartikoff has written about what he calls Ambedkar's Navayana creation of the Buddhist image in the excellent volume Reconstructing the World, B.R. Ambedkar and Buddhism in India. Ambedkar had studied many ancient and modern images of the Buddha in his own library of Buddhist books, as well as statues and sculptures he visited in museums in New York, London, Europe, and India. He was the recipient of 2 busts of the Buddha from admirers in Rangoon, and he was requested to provide an image of the new Buddhist Vihara in Dehu Road. For this, he worked with a Delhi sculptor, R.B. Madhulekar, to fashion an image that reflected his own vision of the Buddha. This, by the way, is a wonderful painting in the library at the Symbiosis Institute and Museum in Pune. I was just there 3 weeks ago and took this. It's quite beautiful. In many ways, the resulting bust was unremarkable, with the Buddha sitting in lotus position, wearing the traditional draped robes, gesturing in the abhaya or teaching mudra in the right hand, while the left hand rests palm up in the dhyana or meditation mudra. But here the similarity to traditional images ends. The head of the Buddha is crafted in what might be called an eclectic style, with Western-appearing facial features combined with marks of the traditional Buddha, the raised ushnisha on the top of the head, elongated earlobes of a nobleman who had renounced his earrings. The most striking feature of the sculpture, which Ambedkar commissioned, however, are the wide open eyes, which appear to meet the gaze of the viewer head-on. In the interviews which have been conducted for a memoir by Maisal Ambedkar, she reflects on this Buddha image. This is a translation thanks to Professor Toran. Dr. Ambedkar had selected positions with open eyes and in preaching position. He did not like a passive Buddha with closed eyes in a position of meditation. At least he did not look at the Buddha that way. Dr. Ambedkar used to say that Lord Buddha wandered in different corners or different directions of the country with open eyes throughout his life. He watched for the suffering of the people with open eyes as one who had a desire to understand the suffering of the people. The clear discrepancy, I should show this wonderful slide of someone respecting the image as it appears now in the Symbiosis Museum. The clear discrepancy between Buddha's references to meditation and mindfulness in the book on the Buddha and his own views about the place of meditation for Navayana Buddhists in contemporary India was not missed or forgotten in the decades that followed. By the time of his first visits, of my first visits to India in 1980, vocal advocates on both sides of the dispute were not difficult to find. At the Graduate School of Ambedkar Thought in University of Nagpur, I met 2 professors from Dalit backgrounds who considered themselves to be sincere Ambedkar Buddhists, but who carried on a vigorous debate about meditation. Professor N.K. Doke, physics, and his wife were convinced that those who practiced meditation were being drawn back into the Hindu religion and could not be trusted to carry on the struggle for Dalit human rights. In the office next door to Doke, Pali and Buddhism professor Balokande was a satisfied veteran of several Vipassana retreats and testified to their value in empowering him to struggle for rank and respect within the university. Doke and Lokande never allowed this dispute to mar their friendship as colleagues in the university, I might add, or to withhold hospitality to a visitor interested in the new Buddhism. The dispute over Buddhist meditation attracted public attention, perhaps for the first time, with the exchange of articles in the Economic and Political Weekly in the spring and summer of 1991. Pune University Gopal Guru professor, a well-known socialist and public intellectual, directly attacked Trilokya Mahasangha for spiritualizing Buddha's political movement and claiming that meditation would help, quote, emancipate the Dalit masses from their poverty and anguish. The TBM's middle-class followers were first indoctrinated by publications written by the movement's English sponsors, he wrote, and then enrolled in a 7-day workshop where they, quote, undergo transcendental meditation. While in trance, they have to chant the mantras for the sake of their own welfare, for that of their relatives, their friends, their neighbors, and finally their enemies. All of this is carried out in the name of Ambedkar and his Buddhism, unquote. In reply, Dharmacharya Lokamitra, the English co-founder and director of the TBM, refuted Guru's assumption that mindfulness training was equivalent to transcendental meditation and that trance and mantra play a role in the workshop training. Indeed, the practices of mindful breathing, anapanasati, loving-kindness meditation, metta bhavana, are both standard practices associated with the Buddha's earliest teaching. He references passages in the Buddhist Dhamma in which samasati, or perfect mindfulness, or maitri metta, loving-kindness, are advocated by the Buddha and Ambedkar. Finally, Lokamitra quotes Ambedkar's last speech, public speech delivered in the World Fellowship of Buddhists Conference at Kathmandu, days before his death in December '56. The greatest thing the Buddha has done is to tell the world that it can only be reformed by the reformation of the mind of man. This is great talk. A clear reference to mindfulness. Lokamitra sees Ambedkar's final bow to meditation as a foundation for socially engaged Buddhism in other parts of the modern world. Perhaps the most sustained attack on Buddhist meditation from an Ambedkarite came in the book Vipassana and Buddhist Movement by Dr. Vinod Wanjari, published in 2003 by the Ambedkar International Mission. Indeed, my copy was signed by my dear friend, the founder director of AIM, Raju Kamble, who we just met this morning, in Calgary, where AIM was sponsoring annual programs in honor of Ambedkar's teachings. Wanjari is a research scientist in agricultural technology with academic prizes in the field. Like many authors in the Ambedkar movement, he is not trained in the areas of Ambedkar's own multi-pronged career, political science, economics, law, and especially religion and philosophy. But in his own words, he has been actively involved in the Ambedkar movement since his college days and an avid reader. He describes himself as rebellious and nonconformist, adjectives that many of us would probably be proud to share. Wanjari had earlier published an article titled, Babasaheb Made Dalits Angry, but Vipassana is Killing Our Anger. In his book, Wanjari quotes the founder of Dalit Voice, V.T. Rajshekhar, who was arrested in 1986 under India's Terrorism Act for editorials critical of the national government and of Hinduism and caste violence. The topic of the slogan, Educate, Agitate, Organize, that Ambedkar imported from LSE in 1924, is described as the struggle for Dalit rights. This is Rajshekhar. Ambedkarites must always welcome crisis and caste war. This is called agitation by Babasaheb. Agitation means mental revolution. Agitated minds will be explosive minds, and when such explosive minds join together, it will be an atom bomb. It will blast and burn. This is what Babasaheb meant by agitation. When we get educated in Babasaheb's thoughts, we need not think of agitation. We're automatically lifted from one to the other. Agitation simply follows education, unquote. In the 20 chapters of the book, Wanjari approaches the question of meditation from many angles, particularly critical of Vipassana, retreats of Goenka, elaborates on the Dalit Voice article of how it kills our anger, and so forth. Let's skip ahead a little bit here. Today, more than 60 years after the Dhammakranti ceremonies in Nagpur, the spread of Ambedkar's message and movement throughout India, and to the many Dalit diasporas in Asia, Europe, and North America, the answer to Dr. Ambedkar's strategic question is resolved. The Buddha had a social message and is indeed been ignored, if not buried, by centuries of caste struggle in South Asia, by cross-cultural transmission of the Dhamma throughout Asia and the West, and by modern authors who should know better with the benefits of social science research and the techniques of literary hermeneutics. But the question of the place of meditation, vipassana, and mindfulness remain a hotly contested issue in India and its diasporas, as well as in the many places where socially engaged Buddhism contends with the softer Buddhism of spiritual retreats and Dharma talks. The young Ambedkar blogger Pardeep Atri writes again, I completely agree with Buddha that anger destroys people, but can we forget at this time Buddha's advice to change according to the times? Would Buddha make meditation compulsory today? I doubt it. I am not saying that anger or hate can't be won by love. It's in the Dhammapada. But we are living in a scientifically advanced world 2,500 years after the Buddha, and we need to adjust our approach. I don't hate anyone, but if you ask, do I feel angry? Yes, many times, but I try to redirect that anger in a constructive way. I'm against violence, as many other Ambedkarites are, and we understand that with violence, we can't achieve much. Meanwhile, Rajesh Kumar Bowder and his wife Usha invite 15 local Ambedkar activists to their home to discuss next actions for the new Buddhists in the Gaya district of Bihar. The challenges are many: poverty, poor educational opportunities for children and adults, lack of health care, sporadic violence in the villages surrounding the world's most famous Buddhist temple and pilgrimage site. I asked the men who have been taken time from work to meet in Kumar Baud's home, do you have a copy of the Buddha and his Dhamma, and do you read it? Do you practice some form of meditation in your home or with others? Most of the leaders reply yes to both questions, as Rajesh describes the programs he and Usha have sponsored over the years for study and meditation on Ambedkar's Buddhism. Both have been attending meditation retreats, as have their teenage children. Formerly called the Dhammachakra Mission and Academy, the group now calls itself simply the Ambedkar Social Movement, because they're surrounded by meditating Buddhists from all parts of the world, particularly Tibetan refugees and pilgrims from Southeast and East Asia. These Ambedkar Buddhists do not see meditation as an impediment to their activism, which would go on in any event. In Nagpur and Pune, where I visited the TBM training programs over the past 6 months, and in fact going back 30 years, among the more than 1 million devotees who congregated the Diksha Bhumi in Nagpur for the 50th and 60th anniversaries of the 56 conversions, hundreds took the opportunity to lodge and study at the Nagaloka Training Center run by the TBM. Many took refuge and took part in the study of Buddhism, including meditation and the works of Ambedkar. Commenting on the growth of the movement over the past 40 years, Dhammakirti, these are some of the, this is Ambedkar Bhakti, you can see. Dhammakirti Maitranath has confirmed the acceptance of meditation as part of the training programs directed at local Ambedkar activists from all over India. It appears that within the organization, any doubts about the efficacy of meditation for those engaged in social struggle have disappeared. So finally, I would like to locate this discussion in the context of the emergence of social engagement in all parts of the Buddhist world. Much has been written about engaged Buddhism in Asia and the West, but I would like simply to comment on the cleavages that still exist between those who advocate secular and religious responses to social suffering, between politics and spirituality, between activism, service, and retreat in the face of poverty, structural violence, and social inequality. The two great robed figures of the engaged movement Buddhist world, the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh, have both been accused of relinquishing their political roles in favor of gentle spiritual leadership and vigorous critiques of the secular mindfulness movement rooted in Jon Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction MBSR programs, are best summarized by the article that Ron Purser and David Loy published in the Huffington Post in 2013 titled Beyond McMindfulness. These Buddhist meditation teachers question the multi-billion-dollar industry that markets mindfulness training for board directors and employees of Silicon Valley corporations, for drone pilots in the U.S. Air Force, and for comfortable middle-class professionals hoping to escape the frantic pace of life in capitalist society. When Buddhist meditation is detached from Buddhist morality, they write, one may easily retreat from the suffering of others, or even enter into the moral numbness we associate with the samurai warrior who kills without fear or regret. Meditation may be associated with the ethical anesthesia David McMahon calls pop Buddhism, an update of the religion that Karl Marx called the opium of the people. I believe that the trick in conceiving and practicing a socially engaged Buddhism in the 21st century will be the integration of social, political, and spiritual responses to the many forms of suffering we face. Meditation may not be for everyone, as Pardeep Atri says, but it should not be written off too quickly as a tool of the oligarchs, as be they caste Hindus, captains of industry, or commercial vendors of pop religion. Socially engaged spirituality, whether Buddhist, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or Hindu, has had many heroic exemplars, and Baba Sahib Ambedkar may be counted among them, whether he sat in meditation or not.